So my presentation today is exploring the question of what do the post-liberation ruling parties of today's Africa do with their legacy of the struggle which brought them to power, and what does a set of practices around this tell us about how they see themselves, their relationships with the people they govern, and indeed their own sense of their rights to rule, their sense of legitimacy. 1 in 3 people that live in Africa live in countries that are ruled by parties that came to power not through traditional civilian politics, political parties or military coup, but following protracted, often violent struggle for liberation. And that may be struggle against a colonial authority like in Mozambique or Angola, struggle against white minority dictatorship like in Namibia or Zimbabwe, or of course here in South Africa, or struggle against post-independence neo-colonial dictatorship as in much of East Africa. And so for these post-liberation regimes, the struggle is a really important and significant discursive resource that really undergirds their political legitimacy and their political authority. And certainly this was the case in the decade or so once they came to power. It established their right to rule. But of course we're now talking about 2, 3, sometimes 4 decades after the fact. And in many cases, here in South Africa, for example, the average person was 1 year old in 1994. So what I look at in the presentation is how do post-liberation ruling parties try and bridge this gap between a sort of disconnect between citizens that no longer remember or weren't even alive at the time of the struggle, and continuing to have it as a salient part of the national narrative and something that undergirds their authority. And I do that by looking at memorialization practices and commemoration practices. So what post-liberation regimes do with statues, monuments, memorials, ceremonies, that sort of thing, drawing on fieldwork that I've undertaken with some colleagues across East and Southern Africa. And ultimately I situate the argument and the analysis within a kind of growing crisis of legitimacy as I see it in post-liberation Africa.